The most dangerous person in a room filled with predators is the one they no longer see. For 5 years, Josephine Dubois had perfected the art of being invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was once hers. Tonight at the Metropolitan Arts Foundation Gala, she was just a footnote in her ex-husband's gilded story, the forgotten first wife. They looked at her with pity, their whispers like wasps in the crystal-laden air. They thought they knew her story, a woman left behind. They were about to learn they hadn't even read the first chapter. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, a thick slice of ivory cardstock nestled amongst utility bills and junk mail. The embossed crest of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation felt like a relic from another lifetime. For Josephine Dubois, it was exactly that. For 15 years she had co-chaired this very event alongside her then-husband Preston Carmichael. She had chosen the floral arrangements, debated the merits of salmon versus sea bass, and soothed the ruffled feathers of New York's most demanding patrons. Her name, once etched onto the planning committee list in elegant script, was now conspicuously absent, replaced by another Bianca Davenport Carmichael. Josie stared at the invitation, her thumb tracing the sharp edges. It wasn't a courtesy, it was a power play. A summons to witness the finality of her replacement. Preston, a man who built his empire. Carmichael Properties, on hostile takeovers and crushing his rivals, applied the same tactics to his personal life. He didn't just end their 20-year marriage. He sought to erase it, to bulldoze the foundation of their shared history and build a newer, glossier monument on its ruins. Her friends, the few who had weathered the storm of her messy public divorce, urged her to throw it away. "Why would you subject yourself to that, Josie?" Her friend Chloe had asked, her voice laced with genuine concern over a lukewarm coffee. "It's a snake pit. You know what they'll be like." Josie knew. She could already hear the symphony of feigned sympathy, the carefully crafted questions designed to sting. "How are you holding up? It must be so hard for you. Bianca looks simply radiant, doesn't she?" Each phrase a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of her pride. For 5 years since the divorce she had lived a life of quiet austerity, a stark contrast to the opulence she'd once known. She'd sold the Hamptons Beach House and the Aspen Ski Lodge, her half of the settlement, and poured the money into something she told no one about. She moved into a modest but elegant brownstone in Greenwich Village, swapping society columns for textbooks on quantitative analysis and trading her Cartier watch for a sleek, functional smartwatch that was perpetually feeding her data. The world. Preston's world assumed she was living off the dregs of her settlement, a fallen socialite clinging to faded memories. They thought she spent her days tending to her small garden and lunching with other divorcees. In a way, she cultivated this misconception. Anonymity had become her armor. But the invitation felt different. It wasn't just a reminder of what she had lost. It was a challenge she was for the first time ready to meet. She wasn't the same trembling woman who had signed the divorce papers with a hand so unsteady her own signature was nearly illegible. The fire that Preston had tried so hard to extinguish had not died out. It had merely been banked, gathering heat in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to roar back to life. "I think I'll go," she had told Chloe, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Chloe had stared at her. "Are you sure? What will you wear? What will you say?" "I have a few ideas," Josie had replied, her gaze distant, fixed on a future only she could see. Now standing before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, she assessed her reflection. She had chosen her attire with the precision of a military strategist. It wasn't a gown from a famous Parisian atelier, the kind Bianca would be wearing. It was a custom piece from a little-known designer, a column of midnight blue silk that was breathtaking in its simplicity. It didn't scream for attention with sequins or feathers. It commanded it with its flawless cut and quiet confidence. Her only jewelry was a pair of diamond studs, small, but of a clarity so perfect they seemed to burn with an inner light, and a simple platinum band on her right hand. Her dark hair was swept up in a clean, elegant chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She looked nothing like the mousy, accommodating wife Preston had molded her into, nor did she look like a woman desperate to reclaim her youth. She looked like herself, finally and completely. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the small clutch from her bed. Inside, nestled next to her phone and a single lipstick, was a small, unassuming hard drive. It was her life's work, the culmination of 5 years of sleepless nights, complex algorithms, and unwavering focus. It was the source of her silence. And tonight, it was the source of her strength. The taxi dropped her off a block away from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, allowing her to approach on foot. The familiar facade was ablaze with light, a beacon for the city's elite. Limousines and black cars lined the curb, disgorging men in bespoke tuxedos and women draped in jewels that could fund a small country. The air buzzed with the chatter of the powerful and the privileged. For a fleeting moment, a pang of the old insecurity hit her. She was walking back into the lion's den voluntarily. But then she straightened her shoulders, the cool silk of her dress a second skin. She was no longer prey. She was simply waiting. Stepping into the great hall was like diving into a glittering, turbulent sea. The roar of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the ambient music from a string quartet on the balcony washed over her. The scent of 1,000 different perfumes mingled in the air, a cloying cloud of wealth. Towering floral arrangements, extravagant creations of white orchids and hydrangeas reached towards the vaulted ceilings. It was a scene she knew intimately, yet seeing it now as an outsider was a profoundly alienating experience. For the first 15 minutes, her strategy of quiet elegance worked. She was a ghost. People's eyes slid over her, registering a woman who didn't fit the usual mold of extravagant display, and then moved on, searching for a more important face, a more powerful connection. She procured a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a relatively quiet spot near the base of a towering Egyptian statue, allowing her to observe without being the center of attention. She watched Preston and Bianca hold court near the entrance. Preston, silver-haired and impeccably tailored in a Tom Ford tuxedo, looked every bit the master of the universe. He radiated an aura of unshakable confidence, his laugh booming across the marble floor. At his side, Bianca was a vision in fire engine red, a flamboyant Oscar de la Renta creation that demanded to be seen. A necklace of staggering diamonds, which Josie recognized from a recent Sotheby's auction catalog, was wrapped around her throat. They were a power couple in the truest sense, a sun around which lesser celestial bodies orbited. The whispers started subtly. A sideways glance from Beatrice Atherton, a notorious gossip columnist whose pen could make or break a social reputation. A pointed finger from a group of women Josie had once served on a charity board with. The ripples of her presence began to spread. "Is that Josephine Carmichael? I thought she'd moved to Florida. My God, what is she doing here? How brave of her. That dress is rather plain, isn't it?" The word brave was used like a weapon, dripping with condescension. It was the word one used for a lost cause, a hopeless endeavor. Josie kept her expression placid, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. She had anticipated this. It was merely the opening salvo. The first direct confrontation came as expected from Bianca. She detached herself from Preston's side, gliding through the crowd like a shark, her red dress a trail of blood in the water. She was flanked by 2 of her acolytes, women whose loyalty was bought with invitations and social proximity. "Josephine!" Bianca purred, her smile as wide and artificial as a pageant queen's. "I was so surprised to see you accepted our invitation. We weren't sure you'd be comfortable." The "we" was a masterful touch, immediately aligning herself with Preston and casting Josie as the outsider. "Bianca," Josie replied, her voice calm and even. She didn't offer a handshake. "The foundation has always been important to me. It's good to see its traditions are being upheld." It was a neutral statement, but with a subtle barb, a reminder that Josie's connection to this world predated Bianca's by 2 decades. Bianca's smile tightened fractionally. "Well, of course. Preston is more generous than ever. He just funded the entire new West Wing renovation. We're calling it the Carmichael Wing." She gestured vaguely with a hand heavy with rings. "But I'm sure you read about that in the papers." The unspoken addendum hung in the air from your lonely little apartment while we changed the world. "I must have missed that," Josie said with a cool indifference that seemed to needle Bianca more than any outburst would have. One of Bianca's friends, a woman named Tiffany, chimed in, her gaze sweeping over Josie's simple dress. "It's been ages, Josephine. We were just saying how you've been living the quiet life. It must be so relaxing to not have to worry about all this." She gestured to the opulent chaos around them. The pressure to keep up. It was a classic backhanded compliment designed to frame Josie's life as small and insignificant. A life without pressure was a life without importance. Josie met Tiffany's gaze directly. "There are different kinds of pressure, Tiffany. You'd be surprised what can be accomplished when you're not distracted by the color of next season's Birkin bag." The shot was so direct, so unexpected, that Tiffany flushed a deep crimson. Bianca's eyes narrowed. The docile, agreeable Josephine they remembered was gone. In her place was a stranger, one who met their attacks with a polished, unyielding shield. "Well?" Bianca said, recovering quickly and adopting a tone of pity. "We're all so glad you could make it. Do try to enjoy yourself. The auction later has some lovely little pieces. Perhaps you can pick up a small souvenir." She turned and swept away, her red dress rustling with triumphant indignation, her friends trailing in her wake. The encounter left a small, silent crater in the nearby conversations. People had seen the exchange, noted the tension. The ghost was no longer invisible. She had spoken, and her voice carried an unfamiliar edge. Josie remained by the statue, her heart beating a little faster now. The first test was over. She hadn't flinched. She finished her champagne, the bubbles a pleasant sting on her tongue. She could feel the weight of the hard drive in her clutch, a cool, dense rectangle of potential energy. The evening was just beginning, and the main event was yet to come. An hour bled into 2. Josie navigated the crowded room with a newfound purpose. She didn't seek out conversations, but she no longer avoided them. When an older gentleman, a board member named Robert Finney, who had always shown her kindness, approached her, she engaged him in a lively discussion about the stock market. "I've been dabbling," she said with a wry smile when he asked how she spent her days. "Oh, anything interesting?" Robert asked politely, likely picturing a few shares of Apple or Disney. "I'm more interested in predictive analytics, specifically identifying systemic fragilities in high-leverage debt models," she replied, watching his eyebrows shoot up in surprise. She excused herself before he could ask more, leaving him with a look of stunned curiosity. The main course was served, and Josie found her assigned table. It was as she'd expected, in Social Siberia Table 42, tucked away in a corner near the service entrance, populated by junior board members, out-of-town donors, and a smattering of other social undesirables. The message was clear: you are here, but you are not with us. She didn't mind. It gave her a panoramic view of the room, of the intricate dance of power and ego on full display. Her table mates were too intimidated or too uninterested to speak to her, leaving her in a bubble of isolation. It was from this vantage point that she watched Preston finally make his move. He'd been observing her from afar, a predator sizing up its prey. Now, with the main course plates being cleared, he began to make his way toward her, Bianca clinging to his arm. He wasn't walking. He was processing a king moving through his court. People parted before him. He stopped at her table, forcing everyone present to crane their necks. The chatter around them died down, creating a pocket of intense, focused silence. "Josie!" He began, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that had once soothed her and now made her skin crawl. It was the voice he used for public addresses, charming, magnanimous, and utterly false. "I'm glad you came. Bianca and I were hoping you would." "Preston," she said, her voice even. She didn't stand. She simply looked up at him, forcing him to address her from above. It was a small but significant act of defiance. "It's good to see you out and about." He continued, his eyes doing a slow, insulting sweep of her and the table. "I know things have been different for you. I hope you're managing all right." The concern in his voice was a paper-thin veneer over a solid core of condescension. He was performing for the audience he'd gathered, playing the part of the gracious ex-husband. "I'm managing just fine, thank you," she said. Bianca, seizing her moment, leaned in. "Preston has been so worried. He still feels responsible for you, you know. It's just his way." She patted his arm possessively. "That's why we wanted to make sure you had a seat tonight, even with everything going on." Before Josie could respond, Preston raised his hand, silencing the room. A server, clearly pre-instructed, handed him a microphone. Oh God, Josie thought, he's going to make a speech. "Friends, colleagues," Preston boomed, his voice now amplified throughout the grand hall. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." He smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth. "Tonight is about philanthropy. It's about giving back, and it's about appreciating what we have." His eyes found Josie's, and he held her gaze, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Some of you may know my company Carmichael Properties just closed the biggest deal in its history. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition of downtown commercial real estate." A wave of applause rippled through the room. He held up a hand for silence. "Success isn't just about moving forward," he said, his voice dropping into a more intimate, seemingly reflective tone. "It's also about remembering where you came from. It's about remembering those who were part of the journey, even if they couldn't keep up with the pace." The entire room knew who he was talking about. It was a public execution cloaked in the language of magnanimity. He was painting her as a relic, a starter wife who couldn't handle the rarefied air of his success. He was framing his new life with Bianca as an evolution and her as an extinction event. "So I'd like to make a special donation tonight," Preston announced, his eyes still locked on Josie. "In honor of new beginnings, and in recognition of the past." He paused for dramatic effect. "I will be donating $100,000 to the Foundation's outreach program." More applause, this time louder. It was a generous sum, but to him it was pocket change. The value wasn't in the money, it was in the statement. "And," he added, turning slightly to address Josie more directly, a sickeningly pitying smile on his face, "I'd like to personally dedicate this donation to my former wife Josephine, to wish her well in her simpler endeavors." The humiliation was absolute. It washed over Josie in a hot, suffocating wave. He had put her on display in a museum of her own past, labeled her as a quaint artifact, and then paid a pittance for the privilege. The faces around her were a blur of pity, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled contempt. She could feel Bianca's triumphant gaze burning into her. For a single terrifying second, the old Josie threatened to surface, the one who would have shrunk in her chair, tears welling in her eyes, and simply endured it. The one who would have fled the room in shame. But then she felt it. Not the familiar sting of shame, but the ice-cold clarity of rage. A pure, clean anger that burned away all the fear and self-doubt. He thought he was delivering the killing blow. He had no idea he had just handed her the sword. She looked up at him, past the microphone, past the smug smile, and into the eyes of the man who had underestimated her so profoundly. And for the first time that night she smiled. A genuine, confident, and utterly terrifying smile. Preston, caught off guard by her reaction, faltered for a second. He had expected tears, not defiance. He quickly recovered, ending his speech with a flourish and handing the microphone back. As the applause for his generosity echoed around her, Josie picked up her wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and waited. The auction was next, and the game was about to change. The dinner plates were cleared, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The polite hum of conversation was replaced by a more focused, competitive buzz. The live auction was the main event of the evening, a chance for the city's wealthiest to publicly display their generosity and, more importantly, their financial dominance. The auctioneer, a charismatic man named Simon, took the stage, his rapid-fire patter immediately commanding the room's attention. The first few items went for predictable, albeit staggering sums. A week on a private yacht in the Mediterranean sold for $200,000. A private dinner cooked by a Michelin-starred chef went for $75,000. Josie watched impassive as Preston and Bianca bid on a few items, winning a case of rare Bordeaux for a price that could have funded a college education. They were ostentatious, raising their paddle with dramatic flair, ensuring everyone saw their largesse. Josie remained perfectly still at table 42. She didn't touch her paddle. Her table-mates, having witnessed her public humiliation, now treated her with a wide berth as if her bad luck were contagious. She was an island of stillness in a sea of frantic bidding. Then Simon introduced the marquee item of the night. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice resonating with excitement, "for our final item this evening, a piece of history, a one-of-a-kind breathtaking piece of art. We have the distinct honor of auctioning Starlight on the Hudson, the final masterpiece by the late celebrated artist Arthur Finch." A hushed awe fell over the room as two assistants unveiled the painting on an easel. It was magnificent, a sprawling atmospheric canvas that captured the New York skyline at dusk, not as a collection of buildings but as a living, breathing entity of light and shadow. It was Finch's last work before his death, and its emotional weight and artistic genius were palpable even from across the room. "Mr. Finch was a patron of this museum," Simon continued, "and his estate has generously donated this painting with a starting bid of $500,000. Josie's heart gave a single hard thump. Arthur Finch had been her favorite artist. Years ago, she and Preston had attended one of his gallery openings. She had been mesmerized by his work, but Preston had dismissed it as too sentimental. Owning a Finch had been a secret dream of hers. "Do I have 500,000? Simon called out. Immediately a paddle went up at a front table, then another. The bidding quickly escalated, jumping in increments of $50,000. 700,000. "Do I have 750? Yes, from the gentleman in the back. $800,000 from Mr. Williamson." Preston had been biding his time. Now he entered the fray. He didn't raise his paddle. He simply caught Simon's eye and gave a crisp, authoritative nod. $1 million. Simon announced, his voice ringing with triumph. "The bid is $1 million from Mr. Preston Carmichael." A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the crowd. It was a power move, a bid designed to intimidate others into submission. For a moment it worked. The other bidders hesitated. Williamson lowered his paddle. $1 million going once," Simon said, milking the drama. "Going twice." And then from the forgotten corner of the room a paddle rose. It was paddle number 427, Josie's paddle. Simon the auctioneer squinted, momentarily confused. "I have $1,050,000 from table 42? He sounded unsure, as if he might have made a mistake. Every head in the room swiveled in her direction. Josie sat serenely, her paddle held high, her expression unreadable. Preston stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief which quickly curdled into amusement. He thought it was a pathetic gesture, a desperate attempt to reclaim a shred of dignity. He turned to Bianca and whispered something, and they both shared a condescending laugh. He raised his hand again, not even bothering with the paddle. $2 million, he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. He was ending this little game now. The room gasped. A $2 million bid. It was an absurd escalation. $2 million from Mr. Carmichael. Simon shouted, his professional poise barely concealing his glee. A stunning show of generosity. Is there any advance on $2 million? Josie's paddle did not waver. Simon looked back at her, his eyebrows raised. Ma'am, $2,500,000, Josie said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. The laughing stopped. Preston's smile vanished. This was no longer a joke. He was being publicly challenged by the woman he had just publicly humiliated. His jaw tightened. He lifted his paddle decisively. 3 million. The words were clipped angry. Without a moment's hesitation, Josie's paddle stayed up. 3,500,000, she said, her voice still impossibly calm. A frantic, excited energy now gripped the hall. This wasn't about philanthropy anymore. It was a duel. A bitter personal battle was playing out in real time with a masterpiece painting as the weapon. The crowd was no longer watching an auction. They were watching a blood sport. Preston was livid. His face was flushed, his knuckles white where he gripped his paddle. He had intended to cap off his night of triumph by acquiring the evening's grand prize. He would not be denied, especially not by her. 5 million, he roared, getting to his feet. The entire room erupted in gasps and frantic whispers. $5 million for a painting even a Finch was unheard of. Bianca looked pale, tugging at Preston's arm, but he shook her off. His pride was on the line. The room was silent, all eyes on Josie. They expected her to fold. This was a billionaire's game, and she was a relic with a finite divorce settlement. She had made her point, but now she was out of her depth. Josie slowly, gracefully lowered her paddle. A collective sigh of relief and disappointment went through the room. Preston smirked, a look of smug victory settling on his features as he sat back down. He had won. He had put her back in her place. $5 million going once, Simon yelled, his heart pounding. Going twice. As his gavel began to fall, Josie raised her hand again. She wasn't holding the paddle. She was holding a microphone given to her by a stunned but savvy event organizer who sensed a historic moment was unfolding. She stood up, and the simple, elegant lines of her dress made her seem taller, more imposing than anyone remembered. She looked directly at the auctioneer, but her words were for the entire room. For Preston. 10 million, she said. A sound like a thunderclap of shock rolled through the hall. People gasped. Some stood up to get a better look. $10 million. It was an impossible number. It was a statement of such overwhelming financial power that it defied comprehension. Preston Carmichael looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. He stared at her not with anger anymore, but with sheer, unadulterated shock. Simon the auctioneer had to grip his podium to steady himself. I'm sorry, madam, did you say 10 million? I did, Josie confirmed, her voice steady as steel. The murmuring in the room was now a deafening roar. Who is she? Where did she get that kind of money? Is this a joke? Robert Finney, the kind board member from earlier, stood up. Simon, who is the bidder? For the record, state the bidder's name. Simon looked at his list, then at Josie. A dawning realization on his face. He had her listed as Josephine Dubois, her maiden name, which she had reclaimed after the divorce. But Josie answered for him. She looked directly at Preston, a cold fire in her eyes, and spoke into the microphone, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. The bid is $10 million, she said, her voice ringing with 5 years of suppressed fury and vindication. From Josephine Dubois, founder and CEO of Aura Analytics. If the bid had been a shockwave, the name of her company was the earthquake that followed. Aura Analytics. The mysterious new paradigm-shifting tech firm that had been the talk of Wall Street for the past 8 months. A company that used a revolutionary predictive algorithm to analyze market vulnerabilities. A company whose founder was notoriously private, known only by the initial J. Dubois. A company that just last week had closed a funding round that valued it at $17 billion. The pieces clicked into place across the room with audible gasps. The quiet, pitiable ex-wife, the simple dress, the modest life. It had all been a lie, a carefully constructed camouflage. She wasn't the ghost at the feast. She owned the feast. Preston Carmichael, the master of the universe, looked at his ex-wife, and for the first time he saw her. Not the woman he'd left behind, but a titan of industry who held a paddle for a $10 million bid as casually as if she were ordering coffee. He was no longer looking at his past. He was staring at a future he could have never imagined, a future that was about to run him over. The painting was hers. The night was hers. And the look in her eyes promised that this was only the beginning. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a final definitive crack that seemed to echo the shattering of Preston Carmichael's world. Sold for $10 million to Ms. Josephine Dubois. The hall erupted not in polite applause but in a cacophony of frantic, astonished conversation. The carefully maintained facade of high society decorum had crumbled. People were on their feet, craning their necks, pulling out their phones. Reporters who were covering the social aspects of the gala were now scrambling their journalistic instincts, screaming that the real story of the night had just detonated from a table in the back corner. In an instant, Josie's isolation evaporated. Table 42 became the epicenter of the universe. A swarm of people descended, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and naked opportunism. Robert Finney was the first to reach her, his face beaming. "Josephine, my God, Aura Analytics. I've been reading about you in the Financial Times for months. They called the founder a reclusive genius. I had no idea." Beatrice Atherton, the gossip columnist, pushed her way through her professional snark, replaced by a fawning urgency. "Ms. Dubois, a truly astonishing evening. Could you give us a comment on your acquisition and your re-emergence?" Josie was calm amidst the chaos. She gave a gracious nod to Robert and a non-committal smile to Beatrice. "The foundation does wonderful work," she said, her voice carrying easily over the din. "And it was a beautiful painting." Across the room, Preston and Bianca were frozen in a tableau of humiliation. They were suddenly radioactive. The sycophants who had orbited them all evening now avoided their gaze, their attention fixed on the new center of gravity. Bianca's face was a mess of confusion and horror. Her entire identity was predicated on being the wife of the most powerful man in the room. In the span of 5 minutes, that title had been violently stripped from her and handed to the woman she despised. Preston, however, was experiencing something far more profound than social embarrassment. He was a man who understood numbers, who built his empire on them. He had received a divorce settlement figure. He had calculated Josie's theoretical net worth. The number 10 million tossed out for a piece of art did not compute, but the name Aura Analytics did. He had heard the whispers on Wall Street. He knew the valuation. He had even ironically had his own analysts prepare a memo on the mysterious company, dismissing it as another overinflated tech bubble. The woman he had discarded, the woman he considered intellectually inferior, the woman he believed was incapable of balancing a checkbook without his help, was the reclusive genius the entire financial world was chasing. The thought was so paradigm-shattering, so fundamentally destabilizing, that he felt a wave of dizziness. He watched as a man he recognized, Nathaniel Shaw, a sharp, highly respected investigative journalist from Bloomberg, approached Josie. Unlike the others, Shaw wasn't fawning. His approach was quiet, respectful. His eyes filled with an intense, intelligent curiosity. "Ms. Dubois," Nate said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Nate Shaw. I wrote a piece on Aura's Series B funding last month. I've been trying to get a comment from your office for weeks." "I've read your work, Mr. Shaw," Josie replied, a hint of a genuine smile touching her lips. "You were the only one who correctly identified the potential application of our algorithm for sovereign debt analysis." "So it's not just corporate risk." Nate pressed his reporter's instincts, firing on all cylinders. "Corporate risk is just the beginning," she said, her gaze flickering for a brief second towards Preston. It was a micro-expression, but Nate caught it. "We found the true vulnerabilities aren't in the companies themselves, but in the over-leveraged, interconnected asset classes they're built on. Like commercial real estate, for instance." A cold dread, colder than anything he'd ever felt, began to seep into Preston's bones. Over-leveraged commercial real estate. That was the exact phrase his own CFO had used in a worried tone just last week, a concern Preston had arrogantly brushed aside. His latest greatest acquisition, the one he had boasted about on this very stage, was financed with an astronomical amount of debt secured against his existing properties. It was a house of cards, but he believed he was the only one who knew how it was built. He scrambled for his phone, his hands trembling slightly. He needed to call his head of analytics, his CFO, someone. He pushed through the gawking crowd, Bianca trailing helplessly behind him, calling his name. He ignored her. He found a deserted hallway near the service corridors, the opulent sounds of the Gala fading behind him. He jabbed at his phone, his call going straight to voicemail. He tried another number, voicemail again. It was after 11 p.m., but in his world his calls were always answered. He leaned against the cold marble wall, his chest tight. He remembered Josie in the final years of their marriage, always on her laptop in the library, surrounded by books with titles he didn't understand. He had mocked her for it. "What are you studying for, Josie, the advanced housewifery degree?" He had assumed it was a hobby, a pathetic attempt to feel relevant. He now saw those years with horrifying clarity. She wasn't pursuing a hobby. She was building a weapon forged in the fires of his own condescension and neglect, and it had been pointed at him silently for years. He stumbled back towards the Gala, drawn by a morbid need to see. The scene had changed. Josie was no longer surrounded. She was walking, flanked by Nate Shaw and a formidable-looking woman he didn't recognize, who must have been her private security. They were heading for the exit. Josie moved with an unhurried, regal grace. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. As she passed the table where he and Bianca sat isolated and exposed, her eyes met his one last time. There was no triumph in her gaze, no hatred. There was nothing at all. It was the detached, dispassionate look of a scientist observing a failed experiment. That look was more devastating than any words. It told him that this wasn't about revenge. He wasn't that important. This was simply business. His empire, his legacy, his name, they were just data points in her algorithm. And the analysis was complete. The moment she was gone, it was as if a spell was broken. Preston's phone buzzed in his hand. It was his CFO. He answered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Preston." His CFO's voice was strained, panicked. "We have a problem. A massive one. A research paper was just published online about 10 minutes ago. It's from a firm called Aura Analytics. It's a complete systematic takedown of our debt structure. It's exposed everything, Preston. Every shell corporation. Every leveraged asset. The Asian markets open in 5 hours. By the time the bell rings in New York tomorrow, we're going to be wiped out." Preston slid down the wall, the phone slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the marble floor. He had stood on that stage and called himself a king. Now, in the wreckage of his own arrogance, he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had created the very force that would bring about his ruin. The sun rose on Friday morning over a city that was about to witness a massacre. Not on a battlefield, but on the sterile, unforgiving trading floors of Wall Street. The Aura Analytics report, which had been uploaded to a secure server for financial subscribers at precisely 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The exact moment Josie left the Gala was a document of brutal surgical precision. Titled, "Systemic Fragility in Diversified Real Estate Portfolios. The Carmichael Properties Case Study." It was a 90-page evisceration. It didn't use inflammatory language. It didn't need to. It used cold, hard data visualized in a series of damning charts and predictive models. It showed with irrefutable logic how Preston's latest acquisition was not a stroke of genius but a reckless, ego-driven gamble. It detailed how he had leveraged the company's core assets to their absolute limit, creating a debt cascade so fragile that a minor downturn in the commercial leasing market would trigger a complete collapse. Josie's algorithm hadn't just identified the weakness, it had war-gamed it. The report included projections showing a 97.4% probability of insolvency within 6 months. The fallout began in the East. As the Tokyo and Hong Kong markets opened, institutional investors who held Carmichael bonds began to dump them. The price cratered. By the time London opened, the panic had spread. The company's credit rating was slashed from A to junk status in the span of 3 hours. In his Park Avenue penthouse, Preston Carmichael watched the carnage unfold on a bank of television screens. He hadn't slept. His face was pale and drawn, his bespoke silk pajamas rumpled. He had been on the phone all night screaming at bankers, lawyers, and board members, but their voices, once so deferential, had turned cold and distant. The king was dead. No one was taking orders from a corpse. Bianca was a ghost in their own home. The diamonds from the night before sat on her vanity, looking like cheap glass. Her social world had already imploded. Her phone was a torrent of texts, some feigning concern, others coldly asking for the return of borrowed items. The wives of Preston's business partners, who had been her closest confidants, were now silent. She had hitched her star to a rocket she thought was headed for the sun. She had never considered it might crash back to Earth. At 9:30 a.m. in New York, the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange sounded like a death knell. Carmichael Properties, stock ticker symbol CPX, opened down 70%. Trading was halted within the first 5 minutes due to the sheer volume of sell orders. When it reopened, it plunged further. Billions of dollars in market capitalization vanished in minutes. The media frenzy was relentless. Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. Every major financial news outlet was running the story, and the narrative was irresistible. It wasn't just a corporate collapse. It was a Shakespearean drama. The scorned wife, the brilliant mind hidden in plain sight, the hubristic husband brought down by the woman he had so spectacularly underestimated. The photo of Josie, calm and elegant at the gala, was juxtaposed with a haggard-looking Preston taken by a paparazzo outside his office building that morning. While Preston's world burned, Josie's was being forged in the heat. The offices of Aura Analytics, located in a sleek, unmarked building in the meatpacking district, were a hive of calm, focused activity. The space was minimalist and modern, more like a university research lab than a corporate headquarters. There were no corner offices. Josie's desk was in the middle of the open-plan floor, identical to everyone else's. She arrived at 7 a.m., dressed not in haute couture, but in simple tailored slacks and a silk blouse. She gathered her core team, a collection of brilliant young data scientists and market analysts she had headhunted from MIT, Stanford, and CERN. They had all known this day was coming. They had run the models 100 times. "Status report," she said, her voice even. There was no gloating, no celebration. This was the result of a long, complex equation, and the solution was now playing out. The cascade is performing exactly as the model predicted. A young analyst named Ben reported, pointing to a massive screen displaying a complex web of financial connections. The bond default triggers will kick in by midday. The banks that underwrote the loan for the new acquisition are exposed. Their stock is starting to dip. It's contained for now, but the contagion is real. Nate Shaw from Bloomberg is requesting an exclusive interview, her head of communications added. He wants to do a full profile, the woman who broke the Carmichael Code. Josie considered it for a moment. "Grant it," she said, "but on one condition. The focus isn't on the revenge narrative. The focus is on the power of the data. This isn't about Preston, it's about a systemic flaw that he exploited and exemplified. He's the symptom, not the disease. The story is the algorithm." It was a masterful pivot. She was already controlling the narrative, elevating her story from a simple tale of personal vengeance to a parable about the hidden risks in the modern economy. She wasn't just a scorned ex-wife. She was a visionary, a reformer. Late that afternoon, the final domino fell. The board of Carmichael Properties, in an emergency meeting, voted to oust Preston as chairman and CEO. He was forced to resign in disgrace. News cameras captured him leaving his office for the last time, carrying a single cardboard box, his face a gray mask of defeat. The empire he had spent a lifetime building had crumbled to dust in less than 24 hours. That evening, Josie stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, looking out at the city skyline. On her desk lay the deed of ownership for the painting Starlight on the Hudson. It had been delivered that afternoon. She hadn't even uncrated it yet. The acquisition of the painting felt like a lifetime ago. It had been the catalyst, the spark that lit the fuse, but the explosion that followed had been years in the making. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. "I'm watching the news. I have no words. Only, wow, dinner and a whole bottle of champagne on me tonight." Josie smiled, a real unburdened smile. She typed back, "I'll bring a second bottle." This was never about destroying Preston. It was about building herself. His destruction was merely a byproduct, a necessary clearing of the rubble, so that her own foundation built on intellect, hard work, and resilience could finally see the sun. The ghost had not only come back to haunt the Gala, she had burned the whole haunted house to the ground. 3 months later, the dust had settled, leaving behind a radically altered landscape. Preston Carmichael was a pariah. Wiped out financially by margin calls and lawsuits from furious investors, he was forced to sell the Park Avenue penthouse and the Hamptons estate for pennies on the dollar to cover his debts. Bianca, seeing no future in a life without limitless credit and social standing, had quietly filed for divorce. Her name appearing in the gossip columns one last time as she reportedly fled to Europe with a minor aristocrat. Preston was last seen by a photographer looking gaunt and lost, sipping coffee alone at a diner in Queens. He had become the one thing he feared most insignificant. Josephine Dubois, however, was just getting started. The Bloomberg profile written by Nate Shaw, titled The Oracle of Aura, had made her a global figure. She was no longer a reclusive genius, but the face of a new era of data-driven finance. She was lauded not as a corporate raider, but as a truth-teller who had exposed a dangerous rot in the system. Governments and sovereign wealth funds were now vying for Aura Analytics' services, seeking to insulate their own economies from Carmichael-style collapses. The $10 million painting Starlight on the Hudson now hung in the main reception area of her company's new expanded headquarters, overlooking the very same skyline it depicted. It served as a constant reminder not of victory, but of purpose. One crisp autumn afternoon, Josie stood before the painting lost in thought when Nate Shaw was announced. He had become a regular presence ostensibly for follow-up questions for a book he was writing, but their conversations often veered into more personal territory. "It's still breathtaking," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It is," Josie agreed. Finch saw the beauty, but he also saw the structure beneath it, the steel and the stone that hold it all up. Most people just see the lights. "That's what your algorithm does, isn't it?" Nate mused. "It sees the steel and stone of the financial world, and it can tell which beams are about to buckle." "Something like that," she smiled. "We're expanding. We're developing a new model to predict supply chain vulnerabilities based on geopolitical and climate data. The potential applications are significant." "And Preston?" Nate asked quietly. It was the first time his name had been mentioned between them in weeks. Josie's expression didn't change. She continued to gaze at the painting. "I heard he's trying to get a job as a real estate consultant. I hold no ill will towards him. You can't hate a variable once the equation has been solved. He's irrelevant to the new model." It was the truth. The burning anger and the need for vindication had cooled, leaving behind a serene, centered strength. Her final act at the Gala hadn't been about tearing him down. It had been about announcing her own arrival. "I have a reservation for 2 at a new place downtown tonight," Nate said, changing the subject. "If you're not busy modeling the future of global commerce, that is." She turned to him, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "I think I can take one evening off to focus on the present." Later that day, just before she left to meet Nate, she had one final unexpected encounter. A letter had been delivered by courier. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, but instantly recognizable. It was from Preston. Her first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity and perhaps a need for final closure made her open it. The letter inside was short, just a few lines on cheap plain paper. Josie, I suppose you expect me to say I'm sorry. I am, but not for the reasons you think. I'm not sorry I lost the money or the company. I'm sorry I was such a fool. I had a masterpiece in my own home for 20 years, and I was too blind to see its value. I was looking at the canvas, but I never saw the art. Preston Josie read the note, then read it again. There was no request for help, no plea for forgiveness. It was just a stark, simple admission of his own blindness. She folded the piece of paper and placed it not in the trash, but in a desk drawer. It was the final data point of a closed chapter. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. She saw the woman in the midnight blue dress, the woman who had once felt invisible. But now she saw everything else. She had become a founder, an innovator, a leader. She had spent 5 years in the quiet building her own world, while the man who had left her celebrated his. But she had learned something fundamental. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes all you need to do is change the world so profoundly that your silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. And then when the time is right, you speak. What an incredible story of transformation and vindication. Josephine's journey reminds us that the world's perception of you is not your reality. While others were judging her by her past, she was quietly, diligently building a future that would render their opinions meaningless. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about the immense power of self-belief, intellect, and the courage to redefine your own worth on your own terms. It proves that sometimes the greatest success comes not from reclaiming an old life, but from building a new one that is so much bigger. What did you think of Josie's epic power move at the auction? Was it the ultimate revenge, or simply a brilliant business decision? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to the channel for more true-life dramatic stories. Your support helps us bring these incredible tales to light. Thanks for listening.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty, and in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. No one will ever want you. It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers. I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas? The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. Yes, Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, it's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture. The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Most people just see the ballerina. He set his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. You see the work. A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field. Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? She corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting. It is my field. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Good. An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne. Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. You know him, he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. It's fine. I should go back inside. Wait, he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. My name is Alistair. He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. Emma, she replied. Emma, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work. He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. Oh my God, You were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list. Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. "Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster." Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win." "He already has, Chloe," Emma croaked. "Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Of course he did," Chloe said, her voice steely. "This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator." Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." "For Emma Vance." Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn." "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his gray eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide." Chloe looked horrified. "Emma, you never told me it was that direct." "I was ashamed," Emma admitted. "And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project." Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. "Do you have proof?" he asked quietly. "Drafts, notes, emails." Emma's heart leaped. "Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything." Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. "Then, we have a new plan," he said. "We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about." He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. "He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it." The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the Architect of You directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality.'" A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. "In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on?" The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name?" Sarah countered, her voice sharp. "Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. He thought it was an ending, she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work. Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.